Good morning. Today we are going to be going over very quickly spectrophotometry. This will be part of the grandstanding lab. And once again, no longer disembodied head. We actually don't have technique for this. It's mostly me talking about what a spectrophotometer is, how it works, and the like. So what is spectrophotometry? Spectrophotometry is measuring light transmissions or absorption. It's the use of a spectrophotometer, and it has several applications relating to microbiology. Basic protocol for using a spec. You're going to warm up your spec if applicable. We'll go over why ours are not. Then we want to set parameters. We want to set it based on what you need. Typically, and what we use for this, we use a wavelength or a lambda of 590 nanometers and a transmittance or T of 0. Then we're going to start our control. Control is whatever media you're using. This is not a blank. A blank would be DI water used to zero out the entire machine. Your control is to set the basis for what you're measuring. As we'll see when we look at these, what a spec actually does, it doesn't, it's in many ways dependent on what you're comparing it to. And if you set a blank at something other than transmittance equals 100 or absorption equals 0, you won't get a percentage that you need for statistics or really what you're trying to get. You're then going to remove control, test your cuvettes, and read transmittance or absorption. Your cuvettes are small test tubes that have your sample in it. You want to make sure that they're free of any type of debris, free of any type of external coating. You want to make sure they're clean glass. You want to clean them, the outside, because we are measuring light. Now, this is also known as measuring by proxy. And the thing with specs is that light transmission and absorption can be used as a proxy for growth. How does one of these machines work? Well, let's figure that out, shall we? I'm going to use this blank space down here. We have here the inside of the machine. This is our sample. Inside of our sample, we have some kind of liquid, whatever it may be. How a spec is going to work is it's going to send light through your sample and then to a receiver. What it's measuring is the change in light that hits the receiver from your blank to your sample. It's measuring a change in either light transmissions or absorption. Since we're measuring a change, we need to have some kind of baseline. In this case, let's say our baseline is 0, and then our light transmittance drops from 100 down to 98. Then we bring in another sample and it drops down to 50. Let's talk about organisms now then, shall we? Most organisms, when they grow, they create turbulence, turbidity. And with that, we can measure approximately the degree to which that turbidity exists compared to a blank. And that is the proxy for growth. Now keep that in mind. Does that mean that we're actually measuring growth? No, we are not measuring growth in a traditional sense. We are not measuring out colonies. We are not doing colony counts. If you're working with algae like I did with this, we're not taking a subsample. Because of that, you're measuring not just live cells, but also dead cells as well. Dead cells also create turbidity. And that's important to note when you're using a spec. Now, these are our specs. These are the VWR V1200 spectrophotometer. As you can see, there is a little corrosion on the edges. These are our third year using them. But compared to what I worked with for my master's thesis, these are fine. Oh, these are nice. You plug them in, turn them on, and they're good to go. You don't have to warm them up. You can set everything digitally. You don't have to worry about mechanical parts failing. You can hook up a computer directly to one of these and get your data. You don't have to worry about putting it down on an Excel spreadsheet. Oh, it's good. At the risk of sounding like a really old person when I'm really not, back in my day, again, at the risk of sounding like that, I didn't use one of these. I used a really cool piece of old tech called a Spec 20, which was from 1959. And it was a gorgeous piece of old technology. And it worked. But these are so much nicer compared to those. Now, right here is where you put your cuvette. This area, which can be difficult to see, is your emitter. And then on the other side here is your receiver. The light passes through here, through your sample, and is measured to the other end. Now, our applications of specs. It's an indirect measure of growth. What's nice about it is the sample is not damaged, and you can do this multiple times a day without removing your sample. In my case, I used it to look at growth rates of an alga called Pavlova lutheri, and we didn't want to remove the algae because removing the algae and sticking in different types of pipette tips and the like will damage algae. It will induce something called programmed cell death, which we didn't want to induce. We wanted to keep them in a wonderful exponential growth curve. So I had to know when that was happening, and we used specs for that. We grew test tubes, and every day, checking, making sure that they're still in exponential growth phase. When they hit the curve of their exponential growth phase, I remove them. What we use them for here in the lab is to check for growth, and as a proxy for growth to make sure that your organism is actually growing. But once again, there's a major flaw to this method, and that is that the light does not care if your sample is live or dead. And that is the major drawback of this. That a dead cell still causes turbidity. So you have to be very careful as to know what your sample actually looks like. If, for instance, you have a culture that starts off at, say, 100% transmittance, drops to 75, drops to 80, goes up to 80, then drops again to 50, most likely you've killed the sample and you're just getting dead cells because it went down, up a little, and then crashed. We also have the issue about what wavelength to use. 590 is sort of the baseline, but depending on the alga, depending on the bacteria, it might have a different wavelength that's optimal. I used a handbook of psychological method techniques, which had a table of this is the optimal wavelength for each of these bacteria. Excuse me, in my case, algae. There's also the issue of having math. To measure growth using a sample method, it's simply counting. Tedious, but it's counting. With this, you have to use mathematics. Period. You have a percent transmittance, and you have to relate that somehow to the bacteria using constants, coefficients, and the like. Math has to be done. And some people would say that's a drawback to this method. Like I said, a rather quick overview of specs, how to use specs. In the lab, we would demo the spec for you. I can't demo a spec for you here. The spec is too big for my apparatus that I have set up. So we're just going to have to deal with this for now. Have yourselves a good day.